On April 12th, 2023, at exactly 9:42 p.m., a sleek black Mercedes-Benz sliced through the rain-soaked streets of Atlanta, its headlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. The city's skyline gleamed in the distance, but within the car, an ominous tension filled the air. Angela Price's hands gripped the steering wheel with a cold, unshakable resolve. Beside her, her husband, Jonathan Price, successful architect, beloved by his colleagues, and the man who had once been the center of her world, sat completely unaware of the fate that awaited him. His tired eyes stared blankly through the rain, trusting in the woman beside him, the woman he had shared a life with for over a decade. But tonight, everything would change. Angela's gaze flickered toward Jonathan, her expression hardening. She had been planning this for months, her mind calculated, and her heart cold. The storm outside would cover her tracks, the rain washing away any evidence. She would make this look like an accident. Jonathan had no idea. He had no idea that the woman he loved, his partner, his confidant, was about to betray him in the darkest, most final way imaginable. And when the truth came out, it would shatter everything. Their marriage, their life, his very existence. She pressed the accelerator harder, and the car surged forward. The tires screeched on the slick road, and the headlights illuminated the path ahead, one that would lead them straight to disaster. Jonathan's voice, soft and tired, broke the silence. "Where are we going, Angela? What's going on?" Her fingers tightened on the gear shift. The moment of truth had arrived. She didn't answer. Instead, her foot pressed down harder, pushing the car to greater speeds. In that fleeting moment, Angela's plan was set in motion, a plan that would put Jonathan's life in grave danger. Would she succeed, or would this twisted scheme backfire in ways she couldn't predict? As the car veered off course, the road ahead suddenly seemed too dark, too treacherous. But something went wrong. The rain was heavier than she anticipated, the road slicker, and as Angela fought for control, her mind raced. Could she pull it off, or had she made one fatal miscalculation? What would you do if you woke up from a coma to discover the woman you loved and trusted most had not only betrayed you, but tried to end your life? What would you feel when you realized that the life you thought was perfect was nothing more than a well-crafted lie? In fact, over 10% of marriages involve infidelity, and countless stories of betrayal end in shocking outcomes. But what happens when that betrayal goes so far that it becomes an attempt on your life? This is the story of Jonathan, a man who thought his marriage to Angela was everything he had dreamed of. He never saw the signs, until one day after an argument, he passed out and woke up in a hospital, only to learn his wife was involved in a plot to have him killed. What led her down this dark path? And who else was part of this twisted plan? Jonathan thought he had everything under control, his career, his home, his perfect wife. But his life was about to take a turn he could never have imagined, and he would soon find out how far Angela was willing to go to get what she wanted. How far would you go to protect the life you've built, especially when the one you love is trying to destroy it? But Jonathan was not the only one caught up in this. Angela had an accomplice, and what they planned next would leave you speechless. Subscribe and stay with us as we uncover a chilling story of betrayal, greed, and the ultimate fight for survival. At the start, Jonathan's life seemed ideal. He had a loving wife, Angela, a career that was thriving, and a beautiful home in the suburbs. From the outside, they were the picture of success. People envied their life together. Jonathan saw his wife as everything he ever wanted. Angela was beautiful, supportive, and always by his side. Together, they had built this world, this shared dream. But as we know, perfection is often just a facade. Jonathan was happy, content even, living the kind of life most people only dreamed of. But happiness can be fleeting. In the quietest moments, he began to notice things, subtle things that didn't add up. Little shifts in Angela's behavior, things that were easy to overlook but hard to forget. What could these small changes really mean? Was it just stress or was something deeper at play? As the weeks passed, Jonathan couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. He'd always been a trusting husband, but lately Angela seemed different. Late nights at work, quiet phone calls that she would abruptly end, when he entered the room and moments when she seemed more distant than usual, these were all signs that Jonathan, despite his love and trust, couldn't ignore forever. One evening, while Angela was in the other room, Jonathan found himself staring at her phone, lying there unattended on the counter. His instincts were screaming at him to leave it alone, but his curiosity got the best of him. He unlocked the phone, telling himself he was just being paranoid. But then the screen lit up with a name he didn't recognize, a name that sent a chill down his spine. The name on the phone, Bradley, the personal trainer. Jonathan's heart raced. He tried to reason it away. Maybe it was just professional, but when he read the text, his world began to crumble. The sweet, affectionate messages exchanged between Angela and Bradley told a different story, a story of a deepening connection that had crossed lines Jonathan never imagined. His hands were shaking. This wasn't just a casual fling. There was something more, something serious. What was Angela hiding? How deep did this betrayal go? Jonathan confronted Angela that night. The argument that followed was unlike anything they had ever experienced. He demanded the truth, his voice raw with hurt and disbelief. Angela tried to deny everything at first, her face flushed with shock, her voice shaking as she insisted that nothing was going on. But Jonathan had seen enough. The text didn't lie. He needed answers, and he wouldn't leave until he got them. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of deflection, Angela broke down. She confessed. She admitted to the affair. She was deeply ashamed, but she couldn't take back what had already happened. The pain in Jonathan's chest was suffocating, but what stung more was the betrayal, the emotional connection that Angela had clearly forged with someone else. Her words echoed in his ears. "I never meant for it to go this far, but I felt alone. I didn't know how to fix it." He stood there, torn. He loved her, but could he ever trust her again? Could their marriage survive this? Would Jonathan choose to forgive, or would this be the end of everything they had? The days after Angela's confession were tense. There were no easy answers. Jonathan wrestled with his emotions, his heart and mind at war. Could he move past this? Was this betrayal something that could ever be repaired? Angela, for her part, seemed truly remorseful. She spent days trying to make amends, apologizing over and over. She cooked for him, trying to create a sense of normalcy, a semblance of the relationship they once had. But Jonathan couldn't stop wondering, could he forgive her? Could they rebuild what had been broken? "I'm so sorry, Jonathan," she said softly as she set a warm plate of food in front of him. "I don't know what I was thinking. Please, let me show you that I can change." He wanted to believe her. He really did. But deep down, something inside him felt like it was impossible to forget. The trust was gone, and with it, a piece of his heart. Still, he tried. He couldn't bear the thought of losing her, at least not yet. Was Jonathan making a mistake by staying? Could this reconciliation really last? Or was it just a temporary fix before things went even further south? The night after the argument, Angela tried to make amends. She cooked him his favorite meal, an attempt to reset the tension in their home. Jonathan, though still reeling from the confrontation, decided to accept her apology. He told himself that he wanted to move forward, to try and forgive her. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the affair was just a moment of weakness. But he loved her. However, as soon as he finished the meal, things started to feel wrong. It started as a dull nausea in the pit of his stomach. At first, Jonathan dismissed it. Maybe he'd eaten too much, or perhaps the stress had taken its toll. But as the minutes ticked by, the feeling grew worse. A cold sweat broke out on his skin, and his head spun. As the evening wore on, the nausea turned violent. Jonathan doubled over in pain, clutching his stomach. He stumbled to the bathroom, throwing up uncontrollably. His body was in revolt, his muscles seizing with each spasm. His vision blurred, and before he knew it, the world around him went black. The last thing Jonathan remembered was collapsing onto the bathroom floor, his mind screaming in confusion. When he woke, he was in a hospital bed, tubes attached to him, the sterile smell of the room invading his senses. The doctors told him he had been unconscious for hours. He'd been poisoned, but the exact cause wasn't immediately clear. His body was fighting the toxins, but it seemed like he was on the brink of death. But who would want to do this to Jonathan? And why? While Jonathan was unconscious, a chilling text message lit up Angela's phone. She was sitting at his bedside, pretending to be the concerned wife, her tears likely masking the satisfaction she was secretly feeling. And that's when the real horror began to reveal itself. Angela's phone buzzed. Jonathan's eyes flickered toward it, still dazed, unable to move. But his brain registered the message before his body could react. "I can't sell the house if he's still breathing. We need to do something soon. We'll make it look like an accident. Once he's gone, we'll finally have what we deserve." The message wasn't just cold, it was chilling. Jonathan had no idea what was happening, but the text revealed Angela's true intent. She wasn't just trying to win back his love, she was already planning for his death. Angela wasn't concerned about his health, she was already moving forward with her plan to eliminate him. How far would Angela go to get what she wanted? And who was helping her? As Jonathan lay unconscious, vulnerable, and alone in that hospital bed, he had no clue just how deep the conspiracy ran. But what happened next would change everything. When Jonathan finally regained consciousness, everything felt disoriented. His head was foggy, his body weak, and the sterile smell of the hospital filled his nostrils. The faint beeping of machines around him was the only sound breaking the silence. His eyes struggled to focus as they darted around the room, landing on Angela sitting beside his bed, her face pale but full of concern. "Jonathan, you're awake," she said, her voice tremulous. "I was so scared. You just collapsed. We were so worried about you." But Jonathan wasn't convinced. The nausea, the vomiting, he knew it wasn't just a random illness. He remembered the fight they'd had the night before, the unease he felt in the pit of his stomach long before he ever collapsed. There was something about the way Angela had acted after that confrontation that didn't sit right. Was it all a coincidence? He wanted to believe her, to trust that it had all been some horrible mistake. But his mind kept circling back to the text message he had seen before he passed out. The text Angela had sent to the trainer. He couldn't ignore the possibility any longer. Could this have been a setup? As Jonathan lay there, still weak, the pieces slowly started to come together in his mind. His suspicions that had been simmering before the poisoning now felt like undeniable truths. The nausea he experienced after the meal, could that have been more than just food poisoning? Was it possible that Angela had poisoned him? The thought made his stomach churn, but he couldn't dismiss it. Angela was still holding his hand, her eyes wide with sympathy. But Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that the woman beside him, the woman who had vowed to love him forever, was hiding something. He turned his head slightly, hoping to catch a glimpse of anything that might give him a clue about what had happened. His gaze fell on a man sitting in the corner, calm, composed, too calm. The man sitting across the room from him, the one who had introduced himself as the personal trainer, didn't look like someone who would be concerned about a patient in the hospital. His eyes were cool, calculating, and his smile was too controlled. He didn't seem worried. He seemed almost satisfied. For the next few days, Angela remained the perfect wife. She was there by Jonathan's side, never leaving him alone for too long. She fed him, spoke softly to him, and did everything she could to make him feel like the world was normal again. But Jonathan wasn't so easily fooled. Every time she stroked his hand or whispered sweet words, he could feel a layer of deception beneath her actions. Angela's manipulation was subtle but effective. She knew just how to play the role of the loving wife, softer, kinder, and more attentive than ever before. Her care was overwhelming, yet it felt calculated. Jonathan tried to ignore the strange feeling that her behavior was just a performance, but as he got stronger, the more he questioned her actions. Was she pretending to be the perfect wife? Was her guilt keeping her on her best behavior, or was there something more? Meanwhile, Angela wasn't the only one involved in Jonathan's poisoning. The trainer, the man Jonathan had never thought twice about, was no innocent bystander. He was a cold and calculating figure, working with Angela in secret to end Jonathan's life. Their plan had been set in motion long before Jonathan ever woke up in that hospital bed. Angela had always been methodical, but this was something darker. The plan to kill Jonathan wasn't just about money or revenge. It was about survival. She had calculated every detail, every move. And the plan wasn't even finished yet. The scheme they had devised was chilling in its simplicity and ruthlessness. Jonathan had no idea, but Angela and the trainer had already planned out the next phase of his demise. Their next move was supposed to look like an accident, a tragic, unavoidable event. Angela would be the one to drive, but the plan was clear. Jonathan would be in the passenger seat, helpless as she rammed his side of the car into an oncoming obstacle. A simple crash that could take him out for good. They'd thought of everything. Angela would play the part of a distraught wife, the one who survived the accident with only minor injuries. But Jonathan? He would be the casualty. His life would be taken in a moment of chaos, leaving Angela free to collect on the life insurance, sell their home, and start a new life with the trainer, the man who had been by her side all along. Their plan seemed flawless. The perfect crime. Who would suspect anything other than a tragic accident? The day of the planned accident arrived, and Jonathan had no idea what was coming. Angela, still acting like the concerned wife, asked if he felt strong enough to take a drive with her. She suggested they take a short trip, just to get some fresh air. Jonathan, though still weak from his recent illness, agreed. He was too trusting, too lost in the idea of everything returning to normal. He hadn't fully recovered, but Angela's constant reassurance made him feel like things were okay again. What Jonathan didn't know was that Angela had already rehearsed the move. The car was rigged to make it look like an accident, and Angela had already prepared herself to make the final, fatal move. She would drive them down a winding, isolated road, away from the eyes of the public. The car would swerve suddenly, and Angela would make sure Jonathan's side of the vehicle took the brunt of the impact. It was a plan that seemed foolproof. A car accident, an easy out for her and the trainer. They had every detail mapped out. Angela would make sure Jonathan's side took the worst of the crash. There was no room for error. The impact would be sudden and brutal, and Jonathan would never know what hit him. The trainer would make sure he didn't survive. The plan was almost perfect, but one mistake was about to unravel everything. What could possibly go wrong in a plan this precise? Was Angela so sure of her success that she overlooked a single, dangerous detail? Angela had been planning this for weeks. The scheme was carefully laid out, every detail accounted for. She'd convinced herself that Jonathan was a liability, a man whose death would set her free, clearing the way for her future with the trainer. They both thought they were untouchable. The insurance payout, the house to sell, and the life they could build together. It was all so perfectly arranged. But today, everything hinged on one crucial moment. Angela was in the driver's seat, her hands gripping the wheel with a mixture of anxiety and cold determination. Jonathan sat beside her, unaware of the looming danger, still too weak from the poisoning to suspect that anything could go wrong. He was trying to shake off the lingering disorientation from his time in the hospital, but his mind kept returning to the same question. Was everything really okay? "We're almost there," Angela muttered, though her voice barely registered to Jonathan. He turned his head to her, his body aching but alert. There was something strange in her eyes, almost like a flicker of doubt, but he brushed it aside. She's just nervous, he thought. This is happening too fast for her. He didn't know it yet, but that nervousness was Angela's subconscious reaction to the enormity of what she was about to do. No matter how carefully they'd planned it, there was always the fear that something would go wrong. A wrong turn, a stray car, a simple moment of hesitation. These were the risks of any crime, but Angela had told herself there was no turning back. "Focus," she told herself, her breath shallow, her knuckles turning white as she steadied the wheel. "Just one sharp swerve, that's all it takes, and then we'll be free." They were nearing the bend, the sharp curve that was supposed to be Jonathan's final moment. Angela could feel the car accelerating, the engine purring beneath her. It was as if time itself slowed down, and she knew, deep down, that this was the point of no return. There was no going back once she made the move. "All I have to do is turn, just steer it into the corner. Just make sure it's perfect." Angela's thoughts were a mix of calm and panic, her fingers cold as she tightened her grip. The car was hugging the curve now, but something in her mind snapped at the last moment. A hesitation, a second thought, a sudden doubt. And then it happened. Angela's foot slipped slightly off the brake pedal, and for just an instant, The car veered. Her heartbeat raced. The car swerved too violently, too fast. In that instant, Angela lost control. Angela's plan was meant to be foolproof. She had calculated every detail, convinced that the crash would be lethal to Jonathan but not to her. But the moment she swerved, everything unraveled. The tires screeched against the pavement, and the car spun out of control. Angela's eyes widened in terror as the vehicle hurtled off the road. The world outside seemed to tilt, everything spinning into chaos. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, Angela was still trying to steer, to salvage the crash, to make sure the side where Jonathan was sitting took the full impact. But it was too late. The car slammed into a guardrail, metal screeching against metal, the sound deafening. The vehicle flipped once, twice, the world a blur of lights and darkness. Angela's body was thrown violently against the seatbelt. Her head slammed against the steering wheel. She barely had time to scream before everything went black. Jonathan, still strapped in beside her, was momentarily weightless, his world completely out of control. His body was pressed against the door, the force of the crash knocking the wind out of him. He felt the airbags explode in his face, blinding him momentarily. Pain shot through his ribs, his head. And then, the world went dark once again. In the aftermath of the crash, the scene was almost too much to process. The car lay crumpled and twisted on its side, smoke rising from the wreckage. Jonathan, though bloodied and disoriented, was alive. The impact had shattered the side window, and blood dripped down his face. But miraculously, he was still breathing. His body had taken a brutal hit, but not enough to end his life. His survival was nothing short of a miracle. Angela, however, was not as fortunate. Her body was motionless. She had been thrown violently against the windshield. Her seatbelt failed to protect her from the force of the crash. She had no chance. Angela's plan had backfired. The woman who had been so certain of her escape was now lifeless, her dreams shattered alongside her broken body. The sound of distant sirens pierced through the fog of Jonathan's consciousness. His mind raced, struggling to make sense of the devastation around him. Angela, his wife, the woman he had loved, was gone. But as he lay there bloodied and bruised, something more than just shock began to settle in. It was the truth, undeniable and crushing. Angela had betrayed him. She had tried to end his life. The woman he had trusted had plotted to kill him. The wife he had loved, the woman he'd built his life with, was gone. But the revelation of her betrayal would haunt him forever. Jonathan fought to stay conscious as paramedics arrived, their urgent voices cutting through the chaos. He could feel himself fading, his body too battered to keep up with the demands of his brain. But through the haze, one thought kept repeating. How could she do this? When Jonathan finally regained full consciousness, it was in a different hospital room, surrounded by the hum of medical equipment and the faint scent of antiseptic. His body was in pain, each movement sending waves of discomfort through him. His head throbbed, and his chest felt like it was being crushed by a weight he couldn't escape. But his mind was sharp, and that's when the reality hit him. He remembered Angela. He remembered the argument, the betrayal, and the suffocating feeling of helplessness. The car accident was supposed to be the end of him, but against all odds, he was still alive. He struggled to process everything. His wife was dead, and it was clear now that she had plotted his death with the trainer. But what did that mean for him now? What did it mean for his future? Angela had been the center of his world, but now she was gone, and Jonathan was left with the weight of her lies. Was he just a fool? Did he miss the signs? How had it come to this? The trauma was immense. His body, bruised and broken, matched the wreckage of his mind. The woman who had promised him forever had tried to take that away in the most brutal way possible. And yet, as he lay there, it wasn't just the pain of the accident that gnawed at him. It was the bitter knowledge of how much trust had been shattered. And though he mourned Angela's loss, a part of him felt relief. He was free. Free from the lies. Free from the betrayal. The woman who had poisoned him, who had plotted his death, was gone. But the question remained, could he ever forgive himself for not seeing the truth sooner? And as he thought back to the nurse who had cared for him in the aftermath, the one who had helped him find his strength again, he couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps his new beginning would come from the very place he least expected it. What happens when the truth comes out completely? Will Jonathan ever be able to find peace? Or is he just at the beginning of another twisted journey? When Jonathan finally woke up from the car accident, he could barely comprehend the chaos of the scene around him. His head was pounding, and his body screamed with pain from every corner. He tried to push himself up, but the dizziness knocked him back down. The accident had left him bruised and battered, but he was alive. Somehow, against all odds, he had survived. The doctors later confirmed that Angela had died instantly in the crash, the vehicle flipping over after she lost control. But Jonathan wasn't thinking about the wreck, not immediately. His mind was still foggy, still tethered to the dreamlike state that came with the trauma. He wanted to know about Angela. He wanted to hear that she was okay. He thought about the last moments he shared with her, the apology she had given him, the warmth of her cooking, the feeling of reconciliation. Those were the memories that haunted him now. "Where is she?" he asked repeatedly, panic rising in his chest. "Where's Angela?" The nurse, her name was Claire, gently placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice steady and calm as she explained what had happened. "Angela didn't make it, Jonathan. You were in a bad accident, but you're going to be okay." Those words were a blow, but they didn't hit him like he expected. For some reason, he wasn't devastated. The shock of it all was too much to process. He couldn't cry, couldn't even feel the weight of the loss. There was only a numbness that hung over him like a veil. Angela was gone, and with her, everything he thought he knew about his life had crumbled. As the days passed in the hospital, Jonathan struggled. His body healed, but his mind lingered in a fog of confusion and disbelief. The guilt and anger from the betrayal gnawed at him. How could he have not seen it? How could he have been so blind to the signs? The realization that Angela had been plotting his death, her cold, calculated attempt to rid herself of him, tormented him like a shadow he couldn't outrun. He couldn't forget what she had done, but he had to move on. He had to let go of the past, even if he didn't know how. His recovery wasn't just physical, it was emotional, psychological, and spiritual. Every day was a battle to reclaim his sense of self, to understand how something so deeply personal could have turned into such a terrifying nightmare. He questioned everything, his marriage, his choices, his faith in people. But amid the emotional wreckage, there was Claire. She had been there since the moment he woke up, quietly tending to his wounds, offering reassurance, and making sure he had everything he needed. Her calm presence was like an anchor in the storm of his mind. Claire was kind, patient, and easy to talk to. She never pushed, never forced him to open up. But in the long hours of his recovery, they began to find solace in each other's company. Jonathan found himself looking forward to her visits, something he had never anticipated. With her, there was no pretense, no deception, just a quiet understanding that Jonathan was a broken man trying to heal. As the weeks went on, their conversations became longer, more personal. They talked about life, about the pain of losing someone you trusted, and about how impossible it sometimes felt to move on. One day, Jonathan caught himself smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. It wasn't much, but it was a sign. The weight of the betrayal still hung over him, but the sadness had begun to shift. Claire's presence became a balm for his soul, a source of comfort he didn't know he needed. Slowly, the broken man he had been began to take shape again. As Jonathan's physical recovery progressed, so did his emotional journey. The wounds of his marriage, the trauma of being betrayed in such a horrific way, didn't heal overnight, but each day brought a new step toward moving forward. There was still so much uncertainty ahead, but for the first time in months, Jonathan allowed himself to believe in a future beyond the wreckage of his past. The tragedy of Jonathan's marriage had left him broken, but the love he found in the aftermath showed him that healing was possible. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But for the first time in a long time, Jonathan believed he could find peace again. What happens when someone's life is shattered in such a way? Can you ever fully trust again? Jonathan was beginning to heal, but would the shadows of his past, his betrayal, his wife's deception, ever truly leave him? Only time would tell. Jonathan's life had been upended in the most devastating way. He woke up to a world that no longer made sense. His wife was gone, his trust shattered, and the life he had worked so hard to build now lay in ruins. He was forced to confront the harsh reality that the woman he had loved and built a future with had not only betrayed him, but had tried to end his life. The irony wasn't lost on him. After everything, after years of love and commitment, his wife had chosen to take everything away from him, all for the sake of another man. But despite the unimaginable heartbreak, Jonathan's story didn't end there. He had survived when so many others wouldn't have. His recovery was not just physical, but emotional. It wasn't easy, and the scars of betrayal would linger for a long time. But slowly, Jonathan began to rebuild. He couldn't forget what she had done to him, but he had to let go. If he didn't, it would destroy him. The question was no longer whether he could move on, but how he would rebuild the pieces of his life, now that they were all scattered and broken. Through the darkness of his pain, Jonathan found solace in unexpected places. Claire, the nurse who had been by his side through every painful moment of his recovery, became more than just a caregiver. She was a source of light in the aftermath of his shattered world. As they spent more time together, their connection grew. Jonathan started to realize that love didn't always have to come with betrayal, that maybe, just maybe, there was a second chance waiting for him, one he hadn't expected, but desperately needed. The wife he had once trusted was gone, and the man he had been was now a shadow of his former self. But in the wreckage of it all, he found something worth holding on to, the possibility of a new life. What would you do if the person you love most tried to end your life? Could you ever find the strength to forgive them, or would the betrayal be too much to ever overcome? And what if, in the midst of all this pain, you found a second chance in the wreckage? Could you ever embrace it? This tragic story of betrayal and survival may have left Jonathan broken, but it also led him to something he never expected. But what do you think? Could you ever forgive someone who tried to take your life? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one man's journey through betrayal, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Who knows what chilling twist will come next? Stay tuned for more true crime stories that will leave you questioning everything.